Okay. Okay, can you all see those?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So this is a session which is about young people who are living away from home, either at a residential school or college, and who are going to be returning to their home community. And we're shamelessly going to be using your views on a resource that we are preparing currently, which is designed to be used in partnership between residential schools and colleges and local authorities. So next slide, please, Maria. And Alice and I are working on this together as part of the Preparing for Adulthood programme. So what we're hoping to do is we've just in the last session just talked briefly about the Preparing for Adulthood pathways, and I will do that again because it's kind of the way this whole resource has been structured. We want to highlight the challenges in maintaining good preparing for adulthood outcomes for children and young people who are moving from residential school or college back to their home community. And we want to share the draft resource with you. We definitely want your views and any ideas you've got about examples of good practice and useful resources to include in the work. Alice, do you want to say something about
Preparing for Adulthood is commissioned by, we're commissioned, and it's actually the National Development Team for Inclusion is our organisation. And the Department of Education commissions us to work on the Preparing for Adulthood programme. Quite often we refer to resources and links on our website, so the contact details are on this slide to the website and indeed to our email. We do work across the country and we have regional leads for Preparing for Adulthood, and it's important, I suppose, to know how closely linked this is, because what we found on a particular programme we were working on called Time to Connect was it was to do really focusing in on community inclusion, and we were able to run and facilitate some training and to some extent consultation with people working in specialist residential education provision on preparing for adulthood and indeed preparing for community inclusion, not just preparing for it, but being part of your community. And it was there that we found that there was definitely a need for something very much more focused on the challenges that people working in both local authorities. If we could go on to the next slide, actually, Marie. Ah, sorry, I've gone in the wrong order, Carol.
That's all right. It's okay. I'll keep going because you might want to.
Okay. So
about why we.
If we go back, there's a graphic.
Move on to the next one, actually, Maria, if you don't mind. We'll skip that one.
Yeah. So what we were finding was that practitioners, people working in schools, colleges, and indeed in local authorities in preparing for adulthood and transition teams and social care were highlighting to us just how challenging it is to prevent interruptions in progress that young people might have been making at school or in college. And we're talking here about residential settings. And they might have, maybe some way away from their home community. And actually on returning and making that important transition back to their home community, there was a real concern about loss of independent skills that they may have previously learnt at school or college. So a lack of momentum once they'd actually done that transition, the danger could be that they would lose that kind of progress that they were making in terms of preparing for adulthood. And what we were hearing, and you'll know as well, I'm sure, from the evidence, is that there's been a lot of problems around plans not being developed early enough. and here we're talking about transition plans, insufficient co-production and preparation with young people and family members. So people telling us that if they'd had more time to be involved in these discussions, then it would definitely have been something they could have, in particular family members, they could have better supported in terms of returning home. And it's a problematic area, as you'll know, in relation to tribunals, because many families perceive that actually the only way to go is to maintain a placement that might be some considerable way away from a young person's home community, whilst some young people may choose to settle in a community that's not where their family are. So very complex issues raised in the course of our work. Difficulties in joint working between local authority transition leads and key workers or transition leads in schools. And it's really here that we've been tussling, I suppose, with some of the, again, these quite complex, they're not just complex issues, it's also systemic, isn't it, about who's leading on this area of work at a time when somebody moves between one area and another, in particular if it's between different local authority or even CCG areas in relation to the health and holistic outcomes. And then also lack of identified comparable opportunities. So where somebody might be doing something really successfully and engaging with perhaps a community group near their residential school, actually how easy is it to find something comparative in their home community that could, and how do you plan to make sure that young person is actually supported to build confidence to join something similar when they do move? And the high turnover of staff, that won't be any news to you, but it's certainly something that has been raised as a reason for why we wanted to put some time and attention into developing this resource, which would be for not only staff working in residential education settings, but also those working in local authorities leading on transition. Thanks. So I've mentioned who it's for, and I think that's one of the most important things to emphasise in terms of it being quite a challenge to get it right as a result, and that's why we're quite excited about picking your brains a bit today. The purpose is to provide guidance and practical suggestions to support this important transition. It's not an audit tool and it's not a checklist. It's really about triggering for people good practice ideas, and sometimes just a good, one of the things that we've had recommended from the small working group that we've been working with is a glossary of terms. Who are the people out there who are working on this, and who on earth should I contact to be able to really broker this in a way that's successful for the young person I'm working with. So we're going to include in it, and Carol will come on to this also, but and Carol's done a substantial amount of the work in drafting this tool, an overview of the policy guidance. So very importantly, that context, a glossary, as I've mentioned, of different roles. So who should be involved from all aspects, and of course, clearly the young person and their family being at the centre of that. And then the bit that we're, as Carol sort of said, unashamedly here to pick your brains on is top tips, good practice. Our organisation is very much about sharing good practice, and we really want to be able to include those in this tool so that, where's a transition from residential school college to the home community worked well. If you know of some really great examples, please do share them and tell us what helped and why. Obviously the chat's too small for that, but your email address, your contact details, your willingness to take part would be absolutely fantastic at this stage, because we are working very fast to try and bring it all together. And the other bit would be useful resources. So I think lots of people have different things they use, but we'd like to make sure we're signposting people using this tool to anything that supports on the 4 PFA pathways, and we'll come on to plodding through those now just to see if we can capture some of that from you today. Carol. Oh, you're on mute, Carol. So we didn't hear any of that.
Thank you. That's because my dogs were being ushered out for a walk and I didn't want you to hear all the snuffling and moaning and so on. Yes, this is just part of it. I mean, as Alice has said, it starts off really with kind of the legal framework that people need to be working to, and you know, it covers things like the Children and Families Act, the Care Act, you know, leaving care, Mental Capacity Act, and so on. And it also includes some underlying principles as well that we think people should be working to. Obviously, foremost amongst those is the you know, person-centeredness of it and the co-production. We think that's quite helpful, because if everybody's working in that way, then you should get much better outcomes. But this is the main body of it, I guess, is organised around those 4 preparing for adulthood areas, and I'm just chosen to give you one of them, which is the employment one, which happens to come up first. And we had a long discussion in the meeting about the fact that we didn't want something that was just about individuals. It's about processes that people have in place and how can they improve the processes to make them work for individuals. So there are questions in, you know, under the key considerations which should identify what we think would be good practice. So, you know, there are a whole series under, you know, what's in place to raise aspirations, and that's actually obviously largely about what's happening in the education setting, but it's also about, you know, what's being done, you know, what work's being done with families, and, you know, where the young people are going back to them, what's being done to enable people to actually think about the employment world when they move back into their own area. And it covers all sorts of things. You know, what are you going to do to discover interests, skills and experience of young people? That shouldn't just be about what happens in school. That should be about, you know, capturing what they're already doing. If they're doing things in the school holidays that are relevant, that would be in there too. And what, you know, some of them are very much more specific. So do you have prompts in place to make contact with relevant counterparts at the education setting, and vice versa, so you can work together to build on the young person's progress? So, and then there's a series of kind of bullet points below each of them. The expectation is that people will make notes and do this as very much as a discussion, because really that's how you're going to improve practice, if people are talking to each other about what current practice is and what could be done. And then the right hand column will include links to all the useful resources that people can draw down, and some top tips which will be written specifically about examples in relation to young people transferring back into the home area. Okay, thanks very much. So these are the kinds of things we're looking for in terms of examples. So one that we come across is splitting the final around employment, splitting the final year into days spent in the home area and at college, in order to build up contacts and opportunities, including in the case that we know about, work experience in the home area. Independent living, it might be something like a young person spends time in a shared house to develop relationships and independent skills with a view to progression to living independently in a place of their choice. Community inclusion might be keeping up an activity that they've engaged in at home when they go to college and return to the original setting in the school holidays. So how do you keep that consistency and enable people to develop their interests and so on? Health, and I noticed one of the questions was about CHC, but we haven't got answers, by the way. Keeping status and contact with GP in the home area to make transitions smooth. So that would be something where you've got a clear protocol in place, you know, everybody knows exactly what the arrangements are. I was looking particularly some years ago, I did some work on young people, children and young people who are tube fed, and that was one of the big issues when they were away from home, you know, about who's responsible for making sure that the supplies of, you know, giving sets were, you know, were available when they moved back into the home area, and the feeds and so on, and all of those kinds of nitty-gritty things that you need to have in place. So those are some, just give you a bit of a feel for the examples. Next one, please, Marie.
Carol, can I just add as well on health? We've got a useful question here from Vicky around an issue which is actually not come up through our working group, but is really relevant, and it's to do with expectations around therapeutic support. So where in some independent residential schools or colleges, there's a very, very high standard of therapeutic support, which is fantastic. And then that translation, you know, what happens when there's a transition? And I think that's a really important one. Thanks for that, Vicky.
Thank you. There is a question in about therapies, but it's quite general. We can't be hugely specific in this because it's got to be a conversation about what happens. So we, you know, it's hard to anticipate everything that might need to be put in place. But yeah, thank you. If you've got any good examples about it, that would be fabulous. So as I say, we split them into these 4 areas, and we want people to be thinking about what they know that might fit under the employment heading, that perhaps fits into that kind of stuff around, you know, ensuring that everybody knows about the young person's interests, their skills, their experiences, and how do you continue those to enable them to, you know, have the best possible chance of getting into paid work if that's what they want to do. So we're really interested to hear anything that anybody's seen or heard of that's worked really well in relation to young people moving back into the home area and getting the kind of support that they need. So please add to the chat if you've got anything. Similarly, and I changed it because I'd done a word cloud and I thought it was a bit confusing. So I've just kind of picked out some key things at the bottom on this slide. Key elements of independent living. How can we ensure continuity of development towards this pathway for young people returning to their home area, and what resources could we include? And it might be things like, you know, what really good examples of stuff that's on the local offer that, you know, anybody could use and that you tell all the residential schools and colleges about, you know, including the housing options that are there. You know, is there information about the housing register, and is there work going on to ensure that people who need to be on the housing register are registered? How does that work? Whose responsibility is it? Independent skills, if you've got examples of really good consistency of approach in an education setting being followed through when they're actually back in their home area, whether that's in the holidays or when they've gone back into, you know, on a more permanent basis. And how do you keep on dialogue going? You know, what is there, you know, is there anything happening that you know of that's worked well? Okay, let's move on to the next one, so give people as much time as possible. We're not being inundated with examples at the moment, but we have got some.
Yeah, I think it's just important to highlight, because I can see from the chat, you know, Vicky's made that important point, and actually is managing complaints and difficulties, and a lot of the kind of questions around quality of therapeutic support, for example, come from that premise. And I think, as Carol says, we're not going to be able to obviously solve all of this, but it is about early intervention, if you like, you know, getting in there early and preempting and equipping people with more ideas about how to avoid getting to a point where a complaint's being made. But yeah, good practice examples is what people are needing. And we do have colleagues at NatSpec and working in schools and colleges and local authorities who have offered to help us track down these stories. But we also hope you can help us with that. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah. And I can see in the chat that somebody is saying providers are expensive and want to hold on to young people. Yeah, yeah. We're not trying to solve that either. We know there's quite a lot of tensions between local authorities and residential schools and colleges. This isn't actually going to, it's not going to upfront address that. What it's is suggesting is that you work together to try and sort out some of the issues. Nor is it a tool which is about trying to prevent children or young people going away from home at all. I mean, they're already there. That's a fait accompli. You know, this is about how do you get them to help them to have the best possible transition back into their home area, so that all of that expensive education time is not wasted, you know, that they don't regress in terms of their skills development, and they can actually put it to, you know, those things that they can do and they've learnt to do, they can put them into good use. So this one, community inclusion, you know, what have you got any examples about how people are capturing young people's interests? Anything that you've seen that has been really positive about positive risk taking, you know, where it is a fine line between enabling people to make choices, to do activities that may be deemed quite risky, but actually ensuring they're as safe as they can possibly be. Everybody takes risks, don't they? So, you know, it's about finding the way through on that one. But if you've got any examples on that, would be great. Really good examples of travel training, particularly for people who've been away from home, that would be fab. How technology is being used to keep consistency, for example, between sites, you know, between home and the education setting, and how are you building bridges out into communities you know, if you've got any examples of where it's worked really well for an individual young person, that would be fantastic. Okay, it doesn't have to be, you know, whole systems. If it's worked on it just once, it's great to hear. Next slide, please. Last one. Same thing, really. We're asking you to think about what resources could be included, what examples you've got, continuing health support, what is there in place, how is it working, are the protocols, what are you doing to make sure that those young people who are away from home are getting their annual health checks? Is there, you know, stuff around health passports between two settings, being used between two settings? Is there stuff going on to support the transition from children's to adult health services, particularly thinking about, you know, how some people could get missed out if they're away from home? So those are the kinds of things we're after. So anything at all that you've got that, you know, if this sparks anything, we'd be really delighted to hear from you.
So Carol, we've got fantastic, well, I say fantastic, I don't know the details, but I'm hoping, Louisa, we might be able to contact you because you've made a note there about therapies in the adult therapy services in your area, linking with the schools to discuss need. And it's exactly that kind of proactive, kind of preempting the problems that can arise if that doesn't happen, that we want to include in this. So thank you for that, and it would be great if I could follow that up with you to see if we can include it. Thanks for your email. I'll make sure I do that.
Fabulous, thank you. So that's all that we wanted to say, and it's really helpful to have any ideas you've got. I mean, you know, if you can't think of them now, but you go away and you think, oh, actually there was that, you know, please do let us know. And our contact details are here on this slide. And if any of you would like to look at the draft resource, we have got quite a tight time frame that we're working to. But if you would like to look at the resource and comment on it, please do come back to us and we'll let you have it. And, you know, we will unfortunately have to give you a deadline, but that's, you know, that's fine. We are going to be gathering all sorts of comments and examples and so on, and revising the resource. And then we will obviously ultimately be publishing it alongside other resources on the Preparing for Adulthood website. And those are just some of the ones that we already have up there that you can draw down, and everything that is on there is obviously free to to use. So is there anything I'm missing the chat at the moment because I'm sharing. So
well, I just wanted to highlight, because Vicky's flagged, Carol, that, you know, something that would be really good to look at would be how local health services contribute to the EHCP reviews in the run up to this transition, to come back to the home area, because from her perspective, part of the issue is that they had recently was the local providers weren't aware that a young person was returning, and there hadn't been a handover or discussion about what would be needed next.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you've hit the nail on the head there, Vicky. I wonder if you'd like to, you know, because we've got a few minutes now in this workshop and it is very consultative. So whilst it's useful following the chat and responding, I wonder if we could, having come out of the presentation, encourage people to come and talk to us directly and sort of in particular flag up ideas or things that they're aware of that we might want to include. Hi, Louisa.
Hi, yeah, I'm transition coordinator at Cheshire East. This is an area that I have experience with, and it's just so difficult. We had one young person that was in an out of area placement in Birmingham, and we had to get on and do it early, and I had to link in and get the therapists, everybody to link in. But it's just about working together and linking in with people to make sure that you do it, but also having a tracking system in place. So I think things now under the pandemic have worked better because you can. The issue was that people couldn't attend the reviews because they were too far away, and it's trying to get the social worker there, trying to get everyone there. But I think now it's getting better because we've got this virtual, so you don't have to drive 2 hours of your day down to Birmingham and attend the review, come back, and you've got a whole day gone. So yeah.
I'm certainly in our discussions on the group as well, and I mean, you'll be familiar with this, but as soon as you describe one particular case and track it through and that pathway where things have worked well, it can be light bulbs for people who are working in such different parts of that pathway that they're not necessarily seeing the whole. So I will come back to you, because thanks for your email. I think it'd be really good if we could capture some of that learning. I like this point about monitoring as well. We haven't necessarily discussed that in the group, and I think that'd be really useful. Thanks.
No, exactly. And if you've got any examples of any tools that you're using for monitoring that have worked well, that we'd be really grateful for those as well. So that applies to anybody. I mean, obviously there are statutory things, you know, but there may be other database type tools that are being used that are working really well. So we'd be delighted to know about those.
And Vicky, thanks for coming on camera. It's nice to see you. You've made some really useful comments. Did you want to add anything? Because it'd be nice to sort of share some of this discussion in the wider group.
Yes, thanks. So I think some of the comments there from Louisa about needing to have a good data and tracking systems, I think is absolutely right. And I think we've only just realised that we don't have that because we've had this case coming through. So it's about trying to, you know, work with the HCP teams, I think, because if we can get ahead of the curve and have some of those conversations about what's on offer locally, how that might be different, but you know, it might be different, it may be just as good, but it may feel different. Then that would be really helpful. Though I must say actually that there is obviously this issue nationally about, you know, adult services don't often work differently, but there's less as well. So some of those conversations might be difficult, but at least if we have the conversations, it's much better, isn't it? You feel like you're working together with the family and the young person and supporting and, you know, figuring it out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's about having early intervention and you know, being able to work together and talk about these things. And if you've got a flag up of your high cost out of area placements and you know who they are, and then you can make sure that you've got adult social care, children's social care, everybody involved, and about managing expectations. So we make sure that we have an adult social worker attending the review at 16 and explaining about what the offer is from adult social care. I'm a social worker, adults and children, so it's really important. Sorry, I've got to go into another meeting now, so I'm going to have to leave this, but it's been really interesting, and thanks so much.
That's okay. Lovely to meet you,
Thank
Louise.
you.
I've got your email. Watch out. Okay. I just want to check how we're doing for time, Marie. So I'm so sorry, but I can't see. I've completely gone blank on when this finishes, and I want to see if we've got enough time for a bit more discussion.
Yeah, we've got until 1:10. We've got 10 minutes.
Okay, cool. So it's just because I think somebody's put the survey up, so I got worried.
Yeah, I
that
think
we were
she's
at the
just getting
end.
ready in case
Got-
people start
Got into
leaving.
a panic then.
No, it's just if people start leaving, please
Yeah.
do fill in this survey for us.
So interesting, those comments about obviously early intervention, conversations early, focused on adult services, and I just wondered about any other points from health colleagues who might be here. In particular, we put up some suggestions around obviously annual health checks and GPs and contacts, so that primary healthcare level. Whether or not anybody here has got experience of ensuring that those sort of more universal health services are well supported in a transition back to home community, rather than the more specialist therapies, which I think have a very important place as well. Has anybody got any thoughts on health, primary health care, examples of links, learning disability registers? Oh, it's Debbie. No.
No.
And the other question we had was about short breaks. Oh, there's a hand, Vicky.
Yes, once again, it's just really to say it's not really a solution, but it's just to say, again, we've just discovered an issue locally about diagnosis of learning disabilities and about how that's may or may not appear on GP records. Yeah. So I think we're now trying to tackle the issue of what happens with young people who've absolutely definitely got a learning disability, but where it is not appearing on health records, and how we sort of fill in the gaps and make sure that's a robust system going forward. And I don't know whether that's another thing which is a potential barrier actually on this, which needs to be sort of unpicked. And if anybody's got a really good way of doing it, so it's that issue about good practice examples, isn't it? If someone's found a really good way of doing that, I'd really appreciate them sharing it.
Are you talking quite generally there, or specifically around this transition, Vicky?
More generally,
yeah.
But it's going to have a big impact, isn't it, on transition if we don't.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. The other question that Carol and I were discussing, and wondered if people in the group in particular, because we've got commissioners on, would have experience of, is short breaks. So I think Carol mentioned it in the slide on community inclusion, models whereby short breaks funding has been used in a sort of proactive way to support a young person's activities when they are having, if you like, a holiday from their residential education setting back in their home community. We've certainly sort of heard some things that have been quite exciting about the use of short breaks, or indeed if it's called that in your area, and wondered if you had any examples. No.
I think it's also quite difficult to think of these things at the moment because of COVID, because a lot of the short break services have been quite severely affected, and so there won't be anything that's probably happened in the recent past, and that means it's harder to just kind of
of course,
what's happening. It's in the past, it's probably difficult now to bring it to mind.
But I think identifying, certainly from a perspective of working in the education sector, it's being able to identify where there may be potential for more flexible use of budgets to support this transition, which is difficult to do when having worked as a commissioner myself, there's a lot of knowledge that probably is held in a local authority that may not be something that people working in schools and colleges are aware of, that might be able to support this. So just, I suppose it's all to do with triggering ideas, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the conversation, there's chat's dried up. We haven't missed anything, have we?
No, I think we've picked up the points and